Hi, this is Zach with Worn&Wound. Today I'll be taking a look at the Hanhart Primus Pilot Desert Sand. Hanhart is a brand we've looked at a couple times on Worn&Wound. They are known for their recreations of their World War II era pilot mono pusher chronographs. Really exceptional pieces, great value, beautiful design. But they're not the only thing that Hanhart makes. They also make some much more modern pieces, which is what we have here with the Primus Pilot. This is a very aggressive watch with some really intriguing design details that make it really look kind of unlike any other watch that I've seen before. Though it is called a pilot's watch as well, and obviously has some signature pilot details to it, there's something very off-road about it, something very vehicular to me, very military vehicle as well, like a light tanks, things like that, that give it just this extremely rugged look, as well as just a very aggressive feel to it. It features a modified Valjoux 7750 movement that has been modified by La Joux to fit Hanhart's specifications. One of the great things about Hanhart, I mean, they're a chronograph fans brand. They modify chronographs in ways that other brands do not, especially at the price point. So coming in at $2,820, it is, by no means an inexpensive watch, but it is a watch that is very much worth what you are getting because it is extremely well built, extremely overbuilt and over-designed, and features a unique modification to a Valjoux 7750. So let's take a closer look. The case of the Hanhart Primus Pilot Desert Sand has a very kind of dramatic and rugged design. It's very machine-like. It sometimes almost seems more like something that is meant to be bolted to an instrument panel than attached to a strap and put on the wrist, which I think is actually very cool. It gives it a very kind of intense appearance to it. One of the signature and kind of obviously interesting design aspects to it is the fact that it has articulating lugs. And what that allows it to do is actually fit your wrist a little bit better, or conform really to the size of your wrist a little bit. But it also, because of having this mechanism in here, has this very bold, chunky, almost like brutal look to it as lines kind of come in and jut into the case, and there's bolts and things like that. So the size itself actually is a little bit dynamic. So it's 44 millimeters in diameter, but the lug-to-lug ranges from about 47.5 to about 53.5, depending on if it's fully contracted or fully expanded. So at 47.5, it's actually fairly short lug-to-lug, and at 53.5, it's fairly long. But your wrist will probably find it somewhere in between that. Looking at the height now, it's actually 15 millimeters tall, which is tall, but is to be expected from an automatic chronograph. Actually, getting it from the side view, you can really see the design of this case and just kind of how peculiar but interesting it is. So the whole mid case has a tapering bowl shape to it. So it's narrower at the bottom than it is at the bezel. And it comes up to this tall bezel. It's about like a 4 millimeter tall bezel that then comes up and out straight. And this bezel is coined all the way around. And as you see here, has a little red mark at 12. Now, this does relate to, as the red pusher, also relates to Hanhart's kind of historical models. The one thing worth noting here, though, is that the bezel is fixed. So that was a little surprising at first because it did kind of, to me, appear like something you'd want to turn. They do have a diver version of this, which does have a big bezel, which does turn as well, but this one is fixed. So this is really more of just kind of an aggressive, almost like bumper-like detail. And I think aesthetically it's very pleasing to have here, though you are going to be tempted to grab it, which it doesn't do anything. Also looking at the right side, you'll see the articulating lugs in better detail. So you can see how they're almost very much a separate shape. There's a shaft here that is actually literally bolted into the case through screws that are hidden by the strap. And then there's a hex bolt within this milled out area that clearly is an axle or screw, which keeps this kind of teardrop shape element in place. And this element, which just is very kind of an atypical shape, it's independent of the shape of the case. I really like how it floats away from it. It's these details that just really make this thing intense and look like there's literally like danger moving parts kind of a thing going on here. It's very cool and very interesting, certainly unique. Now looking at the pushers and oversized crown on the right side, you have a really great set of of pushers here. Maybe it's actually easier to see this angle. They're very oversized with a very large plunger shape. So they're almost 6.5 millimeters wide at the widest point, which is quite large for a pusher, and then they go into a thinner shaft, which actually goes into the case. The top surface of them is domed on both of them, so it has actually a very nice feel against your finger. And as you clearly notice, the reset pusher is red, and once again, that relates to historical Hanharts, their mono pushers. Also, I mean, they have other dual pushers, and it's always the reset button that is red on that. The crown here, huge crown, 8.5 millimeters by about 5 millimeters long. You can see from the back actually how this all goes into the case, how there's a shaft here and the crown goes in. Nicely detailed. It has similar coining to it as the bezel, so you have a nice little visual relationship there. The outside surface has a really nice milling on it, a Hanhart H, a little bevel. So it's really a very, very nicely machined piece, simple as that. Screws in, obviously giving you some nice, feeling of solidity to the watch, which you'd expect. And I really like actually the visual relationship between the pushers and the crown, that they all have a similar shape, but the crown is different. And it all works with the case by way of kind of being these separate elements that are really just brutal looking and kind of just various parts of a machine. Obviously, they're very kind of they're a little piston-like. Looking actually also at the case, you'll notice that it has a even matte finish all around. It's a bead blasted finish. It's a very attractive finish. Gives the watch a darker gray color, something along the lines of a titanium gray, though it is solid steel. It just looks very nice. I think it's obviously appropriate case color for the overall tonality of this watch, which is this kind of drab desert sand, as they put it, which we'll look at more in the dial. Flipping the watch over now, you have open case back here. Case back is held on by a bunch of screws. Indicates around here a bunch of different details, 100-meter water resistance, etc. Inside, you could see this modified movement with a Hanhart signature rotor, which is a very attractive rotor. I have to say, it's all skeletonized with the Hanhart logo. It has some sort of blackened coating on it, so it stands out a little bit from the movement itself. Then the movement itself has some, is kind of fairly plain looking. It's not like a overly decorated movement, though it is, as I said, a custom movement version of a 7750 from Le Jeu Perret, so it is a very high quality movement. Looking now at the dial of the Pilot Primus, you have an equally kind of aggressive dial that works very well with the case design, and like I said before, has pilot elements, but to me really speaks to a certain machine-like kind of off-road sort of aesthetic, which is also obviously largely coming from the desert sand coloration that we have going on here. So just getting right into it, you have this very nice light khaki, matte light khaki surface throughout the whole dial, hence the name of it. It's very attractive. It has an interesting sheen to it. It's slightly satin. It's matte, but it's not totally without reflection, which I like a lot because there's actually a surprising amount of detail in here that little bit of sheen actually helps pick up, so it just makes it more attractive overall. So you have a main kind of surface below and then a very large chapter ring. So looking at that main surface, on here you have a primary index of markers going around for each hour and a very large 12. Looking above the 12, actually on the chapter ring, you have a triangle with 2 dots on either side, so that is a classic pilot element there. But now looking back into it, so a very large 12, it's kind of like the center point for that index. Corresponding to that on 6, you have a date window, black disc with a white date. I like actually how that looks here. I think the black detailing, which obviously goes around, works well with the khaki, so I'm glad it didn't match there. And it helps balance out that very large 12. Now looking in the center, you have this chronograph sub-dial kind of applied area. It's not actually applied, though you do have 2 screw heads here, which is a nice detail, once again bringing kind of an automotive feeling in. But you have these massive sub-dials here, so you have active seconds at 9, and then you have a minute counter, or elapsed minute counter for the chronograph at 3, so your classic dual register chronograph setup here. They are very big, so I mean, you imagine this is a 44 millimeter watch with a very wide dial, so those subdials are larger than your average subdial, which I really like. And then this little kind of area that's raised up out of it helps kind of reinforce the look of those subdials, which are then sunken into that. So it's almost like a little dash within the dial. It's a very cool look. It's not cheesy. It's not too in your face, but it does, it's a significant design detail. I'd actually be interested to see how that would look if they did some sort of dual coloration with that. Some even make it even more pronounced, because it is a very nice, aesthetically very nice area. Looking at the subdials themselves, you have numbers at every third, so I like how they correspond. So you have 30, 10, 20, 60, 20, 40 here. So they do correspond to each other, though the actual markings are finer within the minute counter. Now stepping out and looking at the chapter ring, it's a massive chapter ring. It really, it's a huge angle. It gives the whole dial a really deep bowl-shaped feeling, which I really like. I like the depth to this. It works well. It corresponds to the tapering shape of it, and once again gives everything a more of a kind of substantial three-dimensional feel, which then plays off of the whole machine-like quality of it. It's all very well thought out. And here you have a corresponding minute and chronograph second index. So you have large black rectangles at intervals of 5, and then black lines for the individual minutes, seconds. All of these black markers, whether it's the squares on the inside or the rectangles going along the chapter ring, as well as the triangle on the 12th, are black loom. Black loom is funny. I think it was the right choice here aesthetically, because black looks really, really good, but black loom isn't the most potent loom. I mean, you can imagine it's has to kind of glow through this darker pigment. So in the dark, I mean, it does glow, but it is sort of less of a bright green, more of sort of a turquoise color. So it's not quite as potent as C3, but like I said, I think aesthetically it was certainly the right choice here. Looking now at the hands, you have these massive skeletonized Roman sword hands with little points on them. So you have obviously the hour and the minute. Both are split. They're both loomed for like the second half of it, and the loom is painted right along this skeletonized area. And then you have actually an interesting little detail towards the center where they both go from polish to a little line of brush. And that detail carries over to the very large sub-register hands. Now, usually on subdials, you just have a little stick or something, but here they really kind of gave it more substance, which I like. It's more aggressive. And those are kind of straight sword hands. Once again, they are polished on the outside, but then a line of brushing down the center with a little dot of black loom towards the tip. So very nicely detailed for sub-register hands. And then, of course, you have the chronograph second hand, which I'll start here so you can see a little bit better. It's a polished stick with a skeletonized triangle and then black loom going across it. It works very nicely with the overall design of the watch. Definitely feels like part of the kind of congruent with the family style here. And I think it's nice. It's good that it's legible. The one thing I think maybe was missing, but probably would have actually made it a little bit too busy, would have been a finer definition of the chronograph seconds here, by which I mean 1/5 second marks somehow, but there's a lot going on here. It's a very aggressive dial, so that could have definitely been too much. But overall, there are other colors of this, but this desert sand, I have to say, is really attractive, and I really like how it works with the matte here. It's definitely not a color you see used too often on watches. So, I think brands are more likely to play it a little bit safer than this, but it was a smart move, because it's a very interesting look and certainly an attractive one. Just looking at the movement now with a little more detail. As mentioned, Hanhart works with Le Jeu Perret, who is a very high-end movement modifying house and manufacturing house. They actually have their own in-house brands, hot brands like Arnold and Son, which you may be familiar with, but other brands like Bremont and various other companies work with them. So they're really a very high-end, high-quality movement house. So Hanhart works with them to modify their chronographs to fit their watches, to suit their watches really, and what their design specs are. So, as mentioned, this starts as a 7750, and it obviously is very similar to a 7750, especially from the back, and from the stats. So it's 28,800 beats per hour. It's about 42-hour power reserve. It's hacking, hand winding, all of those things that you'd expect from a 7750. The big difference really is the dial arrangement. Now, Obviously, if you know the Valjoux family, you might think, okay, well, there's also the 7753, but this is not that. This is a modified 7750 that meets their specifications. I believe one of the things that they've done with this watch, I know they do it with others, is actually reposition the subdials a little bit. So they position them based on basically the design of the watch itself. So here, I do believe they're a little bit further out from the center than they would normally be, but honestly, without being able to measure it, it is hard to say. But on some of their watches, like their racer watches, you can see that the subdials are very far out to the edge. But either way, I mean, you know by the working with the Jouperet and everything that this is a very high-end, very well-tuned movement. And now just operating it, I mean, it operates classically. To start the chronograph, you start it with the pusher at 2. To pause it, you press that again. To reset it, you push the red pusher at 4. All has very, very nice snap to it. It's all, very crisp, as you would expect from, any Valjoux 7750 powered watch. On the wrist, the Primus Pilot is, there's no way getting around it. It's a big, chunky, fairly brutal-looking watch. The size of it, it is a big watch. 44 millimeters diameter is sizable, but then obviously the lug-to-lug, which I said ranges depending on your wrist shape, is long. And as you can see here, it is, for me, the way it's pushing out is fairly kind of maxing out. So that is probably a little bit larger than I prefer on my 7-inch wrist here. But I think it's kind of part of the aesthetic of this watch. So you're not buying this watch to have something svelte and elegant. You're getting something that's really rugged, brutal, a real kind of statement watch, and if that's what you're looking for, it's certainly going to make it. I think it is very cool looking and very attractive, though. Like I said, all these interesting little elements. There's really a ton going on here that you can kind of get lost in as you look at the watch, from the lugs to the bezel coining to the pusher to the dial color, and just everything that's going on here. It is great to look at, and also extremely legible. I mean, the dial is massive. It's really, I mean, it's really there's very thin bezel here, so the dial has a lot of real estate. So it's just you can read it at a glance, etc. Starting the chronograph, the chronograph also very easy to read at a glance. The skeletonized hands do help with seeing the subdials under there, should they be over it, which I think is a smart detail as well. Looking at the strap now, one thing actually to note about the watch is that probably will fit better as the strap breaks in, because as it comes, the strap is actually very stiff, and I have not worn it enough really just to break it in. But it's a 24 millimeter lug to lug here, so you would be able to put other straps on that with fairly easily. And it comes on this very kind of intensely padded woven nylon strap, and then this obviously is a matching coloration for the tan, so this is for the desert sand strap. It has this really heavy padding in here. It actually could be leather in there as well, and that just needs to be really kind of softened up, broken in, for it to kind of fit more flushly around the wrist. But it is a very nicely made strap. The edges are folded, it's all well stitched. And then you'll see here it has a very cool deployant clasp here that obviously is designed specifically for the Primus. So you have an interesting little red element here, which matches the red element that is on the bezel. So that's a nice touch. The finishing is the same. You have a little bit of this marking here, like as though it's part of the bezel itself, Hanhart. And then you deploy it by pushing on the 2 pushers, and you open it up and you'll see it is very kind of well designed inside as well. So you have another Hanhart logo here, all matte finishing throughout. And one thing that is interesting about it is actually how it attaches. So it has 2 prongs on it, so it kind of double clamps in for, I guess, an extra secure fit here. And you also see that on this nylon strap that there are metal eyelets going through it, so those will never fray. It is a nice design. I believe this strap actually is large, so I did find it, I think a medium might have fit me a little bit more snugly. As you can see, I'm on the last hole. The one thing, because it is double, you couldn't go one more because you have to push both prongs in, so that does limit the sizing ability of it a little bit. But moreover, I really like to see a deployant clasp that is made for the watch. It really just speaks to the overall aesthetic, as well as just that that the brand is going above and beyond to customize everything. To wrap up, the Hanhart Primus Pilot Desert Sand is a very intriguing watch for Hanhart to make. I think it's nice that their Primus line is kind of in stark contrast to their more classically inspired Fliegers. So you have just two very different and interesting takes on a pilot watch. This one being very modern and aggressive, and like I said, to me also bringing in more automotive inspiration, military vehicle inspiration, things like that. Which make a watch that's just very aggressive, brutal, but interesting and unique. I think the finishing, the build quality, all of that is exceptional. I love the unique deployant, and I also really like that as a chronograph fan that they're working on. They customize their own chronographs. This isn't just stock parts. Once again, recased and reused. That no Hanhart is like that. Every watch has a movement that is custom tailored to it. So and when you think about that and everything else that goes into this, at $2,820, it is a fair price for a watch of this kind of build and style and manufacturing. So yeah, please read the full review on Worn and Wound. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thank you.